I run my own company called Wilton Media. I do communication strategy and whatnot, and thanks to Eve and the Beacon Fire team, I have the privilege of having a number of do-good dialogues here in Beacon Lounge, which is just questions about ways that the sort of social impact community can learn from, take advantage of, and think differently about a lot of the work that they do. I'm joined by Robin Wilton from the Internet Society. Would you just introduce what the Internet Society is all about and here to talk about, and we'll dive right in.
Sure. Thanks, Brian. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're suitably caffeinated. So the Internet Society is an organisation whose strapline, as it were, is the Internet is for everyone. We try to ensure that all the stakeholders, all the stakeholders in the Internet are well represented, and we try to provide an interface between the folks who understand the technology but don't necessarily understand about internet governance and policy making, and the policymakers who know what they're doing but have no clue what the technology does. So that's kind of where we fit in the picture.
So the idea of making the internet available to everyone, I think within this crowd absolutely is understood as having incredible positive benefits, economic benefits, and information flow and all of that. But is there a downside to the idea that we will all be connected, and what is that? Or is it, yes, of course there are downsides, but we don't yet necessarily know what they are. We have to get everyone connected first, and that's the priority.
Well, you're right. I think the starting point is the internet has been a tremendous power for positive outcomes, whether it's economically or socially or in terms of self-empowerment. So that's the starting point. Are there risks that go along with that? Absolutely. So from my perspective in particular, there are risks about personal privacy, about identity, even about self-determination. Because of so much of what we do now is actually mediated by third parties. Everything we do online passes through other hands, passes through other organizations, and their interests aren't necessarily aligned with ours. So what they do with our personal data as a result of our activities online may not be in our interests. And that, from my limited perspective on identity and privacy, that is a risk.
Now, one of the things about the way the Internet Society very clearly operates is in a collaborative way. It's necessary, right? You need the government and the policymakers, and you need the private interests that control aspects of the Internet to all kind of join together to make this happen. Collaboration is something that we talk about a lot in social good and in the nonprofit community, but I'm not sure that we execute against particularly well. So what is it that makes the collaborative approach for what you're doing work that others might be able to glean some insight from, or some basic working principles to apply to their own stuff?
So I think the soundbite level answer to that is that what makes it work is really buying into a multi-stakeholder approach. Now, the phrase multi-stakeholder can get overused. So I think it's really important not just to see it as a principle, but to see it as something you can put into practice. So a couple of examples of that. One is, I did a series of workshops on identity and privacy. How are those two related? How does your digital identity map onto your online privacy? And I found it was that the best way to do that was to get a diverse set of stakeholders around the same table in the same room. And I actually ended up running something like 10 workshops where we had academics, we had policymakers, we had techies, privacy advocates, and we got them all around the same table and we asked them the same questions. What do you think your identity is? What do you think digital identity is? What do you think privacy is? And how do those things relate? And because they were all coming at it from their different perspectives, you often found that at the beginning of the discussion, you were getting 7 or 8 different answers. But by the end of the discussion, it was often possible to construct a simple model that they could all point to and say, that reflects my understanding of what's going on there. And at that point, I think you've genuinely engaged all the stakeholders.
And do you think the physical proximity, the actual working in the same room was a key contributor to that, as opposed to, say, online collaboration, where obviously those people could be in the same conversation but not in the space?
I think you have to start somewhere. And for me, starting by getting them physically around the same table was practical, and as it turned out, I think it was effective. It's a little harder to do that if you're starting virtually from the beginning. So if you try and do the same thing as a WebEx, it's pretty tough to get the reactions around the table in the same way. Having said that, I think once you've taken that initial step and you've developed your simple model that different stakeholders can point to and say, I recognize that from my perspective as representing digital identity and privacy. Once you've got to that stage, you have to move to a different kind of stakeholder engagement. And that's where, so we've talked about the principle of multi-stakeholder, a small-scale practical way of doing it, which is to get around the same table. And then the Internet Society is in the position of having something like 80 or 90 chapters around the world in different countries, which provides us with a way of replicating that process or disseminating the model that we've developed. So that's another kind of multi-stakeholder, because you're then talking about people from different countries, different cultures, different perspectives on the whole problem.
So obviously awareness of the need for or desire to have everyone connected to the internet is huge, and advocacy on behalf of those models is huge. But the skeptic in me, which is just me, would say awareness and advocacy have limited sort of measurable impact. The policies will not change, the pipes will not be built, people will not be connected with those things alone. So what are the individuals and companies and organizations, particularly the types that are here, the brands and the creatives and the developers and all that, what is it that they can do to advance this cause that is not just more awareness, more advocacy? Are there things to be built? Are there laws that need to be rewritten that expertise exists here to do? Like what are the tangible actions that would result in the outcomes that you actually want to see happen?
Well, the first answer is I wish I knew. The second answer is that I think that is exactly the problem that confronts us now, where personal privacy online is concerned. And the reason I say that is that I think privacy is now at the point that we've already passed in areas like healthy eating, or exercise and health, or good posture. Yeah? Those are all things where we all wrestle personally with, how do I do it right? How do I preserve my health by, how do I not get backache? And it's one thing to know that, it's another thing to have habits in your life that give you good posture and that stop you getting backache. Or that, encourage you to eat stuff that is good for you. Okay. Yes, everyone in the room is kind of, yes. So how do we do that? And I think the healthy eating one is a really great example, because I, for one, have spent most of my life being nagged by someone to eat my vegetables. Yeah? You can nag people in that way, and usually, as a kid, your reaction is, well, I don't care, I don't like that. Yeah? And you don't change your behaviour. Then as you grow up, you maybe get a little more from understanding slogans like 5 a day. So eat 5 portions of fruit and veg a day. It's a little bit better than nagging someone, but it's still a kind of nagging. Yeah. So how does it actually work? Well, does it work because you start to feel guilty? Usually not. Guilt is a motivator, but it's not usually a good, sustainable one, because sooner or later you rebel against it. But if you can manage to both change someone's attitude to privacy or healthy eating, and give them the right information at the right time with food labeling, ultimately what you might be able to do is change the values that they apply to each choice they make. And there you've kind of got a different problem to solve. How do you change someone's values so that when confronted with a banana or a donut, they choose the banana? Yeah. And that they do that sustainably and reliably. And ultimately, it might even turn into a habit, that they don't even make that choice consciously, they just reach for the banana. So how do you reach for the privacy banana?
That's a great question.
How do we get those habits into people? And I think this cross-disciplinary community knows a lot more about things like nudging, about social effects, about how to influence people on a sustainable basis, and not just nag them.
So you don't hear a lot of that discussion at South by. You do hear, yesterday there's a keynote by the head of 23andMe. Julian Assange spoke over the weekend. Edward Snowden is scheduled to speak today. And those conversations become a part of this discussion of privacy and the benefits of free information flow and connectedness. Is that a useful way for the conversation about Internet for All and privacy to be framed from your perspective, or is sort of the holding someone like Edward Snowden up as a hero or attacking him as a traitor, just obscure the larger and more important conversation about, we only have 2 billion connected and there are 7 billion people on the planet, so can we focus on one thing at a time and then get back to, whether or not this guy's an a-hole or not?
Yeah. I don't think in policy areas you ever get to focus on one thing at a time, unfortunately. And yes, I do think that the polarizing the discussion is not really helpful. You can call whistleblowers traitors or crusaders. Does that actually move us forward? And I don't think anyone on either side of that is actually completely right or wrong. If the government is doing things that are unaccountable, that are not transparent, it doesn't really matter how good their motivation is. That's not their job. Their job is to do things democratically. And if they're doing things if they're making secret laws, if they're making decisions based on laws that have not been put to the public test, that's not democratic, and it's not ultimately in anyone's interest, because it leads to government that is not democratic. If that's what we wanted, we would vote for it, if that's not a paradox. So there's no absolute right and wrong here, but when something is happening that should not happen, it's more important that we should understand that and be able to fix it than the modalities of how the information got out, in my view.
So one of the benefits, arguably, of South by Southwest is we are having conversations about maybe not net neutrality so much as privacy and the implications of connectedness and things like that. But there are also a lot of other conversations going on at South by. Are there other trends or topics that are not constructive in relation to the conversation about Internet for All? I mean, is all the conversation about, there's one about revenge porn the other day, and the future of television, and sort of how private networks pop up, and produce better content. Do these things undermine or distract people from the conversation that you're trying to have in a bad way, or sort of, any conversation, that talks about kind of more people getting access to information and enjoying themselves online, eventually leads itself to, well, yeah, then that's why everyone should be online.
I think those individual conversations may or may not lead somewhere positive, but I think they all contribute to the picture. And I think what we have to face here is that we still don't understand the scope and the nature of the effect the internet has on our society and the way we interact as individuals. There are lots of ways in which that is broken. So for instance, as individuals, as social beings, as humans, we understand perfectly well what it is to make a disclosure in one context and expect that disclosure not to show up somewhere else. That's something we've learned in the playground. The first day you go home from school and your mum says, your teacher told me something very disturbing about you. And you think, wait a minute, that was at school. These contexts cross. The adults talk to each other. That's not my model. My model is I talk to my mum and she doesn't talk to my teacher. So we grow up with these things, and yet we go online and all those contextual boundaries, they don't happen. So I think the more we understand about those kinds of effects, the better we understand the internet and how it relates to our social life. So I think it's good that those conversations are happening, no matter if sometimes, like in revenge porn, the actual the subject is disturbing. I think unless we understand that, it's no good sticking our heads in the sand. We have to understand that those things happen and how we're going to react to it.
Before I let you go, this South by Southwest is a unique gathering. Creatives and developers and technologists and investors and media and people focused on social good. What question would you want this community to take up because you think they could produce a better or different answer than the one you would get somewhere else? Or what challenge would you want to put to this community? And it could be, you as an individual, and it could be you on behalf of the Internet Society. But, what does this unique gathering presumably create as an opportunity for a question to be answered or a conversation to be had?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that. That was worth the $5, wasn't it? I think, and I'm going to cheat. I've actually put this up on the board as a lounge sourcing thing.
Did you?
Okay, so we talked a little bit earlier about how do you nudge people in a sustainable way to change their privacy habits, and that has all kinds of aspects to it. Do you just give them more information? That's probably not enough. That might inform them, but it won't necessarily change their attitudes. What do you do after that? If someone's made one good privacy decision, how do you give them affirmation that says, that was good? Because the other examples I gave, health and diet, if you set yourself a goal, you can actually measure when you achieve it. Online privacy, it's really tough to do that. So how do we do that? How do we provide people with feedback and nudges and information as they make privacy decisions that actually accumulates and turns into something that might change their values and change the choices they make? So I'm open for suggestions. It's a tricky problem, but I think unless we try and understand the problem in all its detail, we won't produce the kind of sustainable, habitual change that I think we need.
That's a great question. All right, Robin Wilton from the Internet Society, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks.